Welcome back to another quick training video here. Today we are in a Windows 11 virtual machine, and what we want to do is expand our drive space. If you happen to be a Lighthouse Labs cybersecurity bootcamp student, you'll notice the drive space is a little bit tight on your virtual machines. Here we've got 7 gigabytes free today, but with Windows updates this can drop easily down to just a few hundred megabytes, and it creates some significant performance problems on your virtual machine. If you're not in the Lighthouse Labs cybersecurity bootcamp program, you still may see this same issue depending on what your storage space is set up, whether you've configured that off the start or whether that's been done through some other means. If your storage space isn't enough and you need to expand this drive space, just keep watching and we'll show you how to do that. Again, this is a Windows virtual machine. This process works for any other drive expansion. We won't get into the hardware aspects of that today. This is just for virtual machines. But the theoretical part and the practical part on the Windows system itself is identical. So we're just going to go ahead and close that, and we're actually going to shut down this virtual machine. And that's suspending, so that's not going to work. We want to actually power off. So we'll just let this thing complete here, and then we'll force a power off. All right, so that suspended. We want to force a shutdown here. So if you don't know how to do this, you want to, on a Mac anyway, using VMware, we're going to hold down our Option key and we just go up to the virtual machine and we'll hit power off. If we don't have our Option key held down, you'll see we can resume it, but all these other commands are grayed out. So again, hold down your Option key, just hit power off. You will get a pop-up window just like so, and yes, power off. That is shut down. So now we need to go into this settings for the virtual machine. So I just hit right click. You'll get this menu pop up. My apologies, some of these windows are opening up on a different screen, so I just have to drag them across. We go into hard disk, removable devices here. It's not technically removable, but that's where you would find it. We've got our virtual disk, and this is where we can set the size. We'll open up advanced options and have a quick chat there, but let's just take that up to a nice round number, 100 gigabytes. You want to, of course, make sure you've got space on your host machine to do this. So if you don't have free space, definitely don't be expanding this. If you've got some free space to spare, go ahead and expand that up to what you think you might need. We can always grow it later. It's easier to grow than to shrink. Down here, we want to leave this bus type to NVMe. We'll leave that alone. We don't want to touch remove hard disk. We want to, generally it's best split into multiple files. And we want to leave this one here unchecked. So pre-allocate disk space. What this is going to do is take that 100 gigabytes and block that from your host machine to use. So if you are kind of tight on space and you're not sure how much drive space you need for your virtual machine and you turn it up a little bit too high, if you don't have this checked, just like we do, it's not going to affect your host at all. But at the moment we check this and start the process, all of a sudden this 100 gigabytes is now taken from your host and won't be used again by your host for anything. There's pros and cons to each. I typically like to leave it unchecked because I know I've got lots of space on my host drive for this thing to grow if I need it. So I'm going to leave it unchecked. That's what I would recommend to you as well. But if you have a critical virtual machine and it uses space that you've given it, maybe you want to consider pre-allocating that drive space. You're not going to really see any performance differences, but I mean, as we hover over it, it does say pre-allocated disks can have better performance, but takes up the full disk space at all times. I haven't seen enough evidence with what I do to see much for performance improvements. Your results might vary. Feel free to play with it if you want, but I typically leave it unchecked. Okay, splitting a disk, it's hover text here, makes it easier for you to move your virtual machine to an external storage drive. So I leave this checked anyway, and my virtual machines actually run from an external drive on this particular Mac OS that you're seeing this all being done from right here. I've got a VM server that doesn't run things from an external drive. It runs from an internal NVMe, so things are nice and quick there, and I don't have to worry too much about this. But just for the purpose of the demo here, we're using our Mac. We've got our VMware and our virtual machine inside there. So we're going to leave this unchecked. We'll leave this one checked. We've expanded it up to 100 gigabytes, and we just hit apply. It has been resized successfully. Click OK. We can close out of the settings, and we'll go back and start up our virtual machine. Just give it a moment here. At this point, you might see a process running or that starts up and just wants to do a quick disk check. That's perfectly normal. Just let it do its thing. In my case, we're going to boot right up into our virtual machine. There was no issues. And we'll type in our password. All right, so Windows is booted up, just like you saw it before. If we go to our About screen, and then storage, you'll see we've still got a 59.1 gigabyte drive, 7.63 gigabytes free. So you might be wondering now, okay, well, we just assigned 100 gigabytes to this thing. Where is it? And that's because a virtual machine is a two-step process to assigning drive space. Even if it was a real machine and we wanted to, we were repartitioning things, you have to use that space. You have to allocate that space into the virtual machine. It's there. It's available. Don't worry. You haven't done something wrong already, but we have to tell Windows that there's space available and we need to use that. So to do that, we go into a program called Disk Manager. So we're just going to go Disk Manager, and it's the first one on the list, create and format hard disk partitions. We click. And you'll see here we've got our C drive, we've got this disk 0, partition 1, we've got a disk 0, partition 4, and look at this, 40 gigabytes of unallocated space. So we need to take this 40 gigabytes of unallocated space and move it to this C drive of 59.1 gigabytes of unallocated space. The problem is, if we right click, this is where it's normally done, you right click and you would want to come down to extend volume. In the case of this virtual machine, we've got a recovery partition right here that's in the way. We can't easily take these two, we can't drag and drop. There's no right click on here that's going to let us do anything. Even on the recovery partition here, the only thing we can do is go into help. Now, in this case, we're working with a virtual machine. We're working with a cybersecurity related virtual machine. And because of that, these things are kind of destructive. Not really, they're not really destructive, bad choice of words. What they are is disposable, I guess is maybe the better term. If we do something wrong and we break a virtual machine, we can just delete it and then start new. In the case of this particular one, it's set up with some Lighthouse Labs related software for different projects and whatnot, for doing different security analysis, and that's all great. But still, you can delete it very easily and then just recreate it from that same image that was given at the start of the program. If you're recreating a Windows virtual machine right from scratch because it's something totally different that you're working on, that's fine too. Ideally, you've probably got a copy of it, but if you don't, just delete it and start over again. That's the beauty of virtual machines. So what we need to do is because this is a virtual machine, we don't really need to worry about this recovery partition, because if we need to recover, we're just going to rebuild our virtual machine, or we're going to recreate the image. We're going to use the image that we were given. Whatever we're going to do is our recovery process. We don't need this recovery partition. So we're going to open a command prompt here. If you don't have it pinned on your taskbar, it's just command and open command prompt, just like so. We don't need the two, but we'll just work with the one there. So now what we need to do is get rid of that recovery partition, and we do that with a program called diskpart, D-I-S-K-P-A-R-T. Give ourselves administrator rights, and diskpart is open. Microsoft diskpart version 10.0. We just got it's all command line. We're just going to type into here, and what we want to do is list disk. Press enter. We'll see what we've got for disks. Then we need to select the disk. We've only got one disk, and it's disk 0. So select space disk space 0. Press enter. List partition. And now you can see what we see back here on the graphical user interface. We've got disk 0 right here. And we've got partition 1, which is our system partition. We've got this next partition right here, which is our primary partition. We've got our recovery partition, so that's number 4, and we've got a reserve partition number 2. If you click through them up here, you can also see how they work. They're not quite lined up, and we don't have our reserved partition, but that's okay. We're working back in diskpart. Now what we want to do is select partition 4. Partition 4 is now the selected partition, and remember it's recovery. And we want to get rid of that. Delete partition override. There's no going back from this. The moment you press enter, it's gone. And you can see that it did update on our disk management screen right here. So we've got our disk 0 partition 1. We've got our disk 0 partition 3, and we've got our new partition here, or not really new, but we've got our partition here that's got the unallocated space. If we go back to our disk part program, list partition, you'll see right here, system, reserved, and primary. So our unallocated space doesn't show up as an official partition yet, because it needs to be something needs to be done with it. From here, we could actually make a D drive. We don't want to do that. We still want to merge everything together. But you'll notice our recovery partition is not in the way. So if we go back to C drive, we can go extend volume. So we'll click on that. And sorry, that was done with a right click, and come down to extend volume. Just follow the little wizard, press next. We don't have to do anything here at all. We can adjust the space if we want. And give it 30 gigabytes of space if we wanted to, and then leave 10 gigabytes for something else. Create that D drive if you really wanted to. We're just going to give it all, so we're not going to touch anything here. We'll hit next. Just confirm your settings. Disk selected, disk 0, 41 gigabytes of space approximately. Close this wizard, click finish, and we do so. And now you'll see we've got our system partition, and we've got now our nearly 100 gigabyte C drive. If we go back to disk part, we don't need to, but we will. List partition, you'll see the change. System, reserved, and primary is now at 100 gigabytes, whereas it used to be 59 gigabytes. Disk part, we can just type exit to close that out. We can close our command prompt. If you go back to settings, storage settings, look at this. C drive now is nearly 100 gigabytes, and it's just going to go through and check your apps and do all that fun stuff. So that's it. That's all there is to expanding drive space in a virtual machine. showing you this on a Mac host using VMware. The process is basically the same if you're using VirtualBox, whether that's running on a Windows host or a Linux host. The process is the same. Just expand that drive space in the virtual machine manager in the settings for the virtual machine, and then you've got to come into your Windows virtual machine itself and tell it you want to use the rest of that drive space. That's it. Any questions at all, feel free to leave a comment down below and I will get back to you. That's it. Thanks for watching. Be sure to, of course, like, subscribe, and share.